The story we want to talk about right now with Mike Rutherford, before we take any more of your calls, is the state of affairs with local councils, because unbelievably, local council parking charges have actually soared, have actually gone up, right, by about 90%, which is a hard enough fact to take in at first instance. But then, when you realise that not only is that happening, but that on the other side of expenditure and looking after the roads, potholes and spending on potholes has actually plummeted. It's a dreadful state of affairs. Let's find out from Mike Rutherford how this can continue. Mike, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, Michael.
Thank you very much indeed. So, council parking charges, always a bugbear on this show. I don't understand why they charge so much, why they want to take so much of our money just because they can. But if they're not now spending any of that money on the roads, what is going on?
Well, I can sum it up in one word, actually, Mike, and that's greed.
Yes.
Pure greed. What are we, the humble souls of the towns and cities and villages of Britain, going to do about it? I was talking to a presenter the other day. So you're very cynical, you know. What you do is you vote out the local councils and you vote in the new ones, as if the new ones are going to be replacing the old ones. They're going to tear up the plans that are there in existence and are funding the coffers of the councils. I mean, we're stuck with it, and there's very little we can do about it, except, I suppose, vote with our feet and just whenever possible, just refuse to cough up. I mean, I've got this thing. It's not something everybody can do, is it? But, you know, I've got this thing where I'm now parking on the edge of town and saying to myself, well, I've got to do my 6,000 or 8,000 steps a day. Maybe I can actually kill two birds with one stone here. Save some money by parking on the edge of town and then walking in the rest of the way. But, of course, that's not easy for a lot of people to do. And why should you? Why shouldn't you be able to just park at a reasonable price and get a reasonable service and know that the money that you're sticking into the council coffers is then recirculated and goes towards things like potholes, etc.? I mean, it's pure greed. It's a scam. And I'm sorry to say, there's not a lot we can do about it.
Unfortunately not. And because it's been going on for the best part of about 10 years, all of this kind of policy, it has contributed massively, in my view, to the kind of death of the high street. We don't often talk about the council parking situation when we talk about shops closing down. We blame the internet. We blame people ordering stuff online. We blame people not being able to park in a street because there's no parking. But what we don't do is blame the council for making it so expensive for people to park and walk to the shops.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I've got a mate who's a particularly tight-fisted old friend of mine who when the lads meet up once a week for a bite to eat or a beer, he always turns up at 10 o'clock.
Right.
He's always the last one to turn up. And when I asked him why the other day, he said, because the parking charges apply up until 10,
right,
and I refuse to pay them. Well, that's money that him and a lot of other people are not spending in the high street, because, I mean, how can you justify charging people until 10 o'clock to park close to some nothingy high street in the sticks somewhere? The other thing is, why not, you know, in order to rejuvenate the high street, I'd actually introduce a system that I've seen in other countries, particularly in Asia. You know, as you leave the car park or wherever, they're almost begging you to say, have you got a receipt for something that you've bought?
Right.
In other words, if you've been to the cinema, or you've been for a meal, or even been for a few pints, as long as you've got a receipt, of course, not a few pints if you're driving, but if you've got a designated driver and you can prove that you've spent some money in the town, you get free parking. I mean,
I've always taken great exception to the parking policy generally in this country, because if you go somewhere like to the Westfield Centre in Stratford or in Shepherd's Bush, right, in London, both very high-end kind of shopping centres, right, you have to pay to park there. It's an underground car park, and there is no discount offered, generally speaking, unless there's some kind of promotion going on. And you can spend 10 quid parking there for a couple of hours. I took one of my kids to the cinema there the other week, and it was something like about 8 quid to park before you even went inside.
Yeah, well, and I couldn't agree with you more, but what have we got down the road from Westfield and places like that you're talking about? You've got the Blue Water Shopping Centre.
Yes.
And I think it's the same on the other side of the river in Essex, the name of which it's escaped me. But you've got those two centres there that are always packed because it's free parking. And, I mean, it seems blindingly obvious to me that Lakeside, of course, is the one in Essex, but it's obvious that they are dragging people away from the likes, from from places like central London, from Westfield, and the local towns like Dartford and Gravesend. You know, they're kind of ghost towns, those places, because people are obviously going to go to an out-of-town shopping centre that's got free parking. Those places are absolutely thriving.
Yes.
And that's the lesson, surely, for all these councillors. Don't sit and moan about it and say, oh, you know, everyone's leaving the high street. You, the councillor, are forcing people to leave the high street, shops to leave the high street, restaurants to leave the high street because of your parking charges.
Right.
And let's not also forget, Mike, the other one, and I saw a story yesterday and I could hardly believe it. 25 quid a day to park your car, according to London's newspaper last night that I read when I was on the train. £25 to park your car at Reading railway station.
Goodness gracious. That's meant to be, and that's meant to be encouraging people to use the train, right?
Well, that's one of those classic stations. It's in a perfect position. You whack up the M4, you get so far, and you say, right, we're not going to drive any further because it all starts getting too congested from this point. Perfect, traffic planning, thinking it through. You park your car at Reading, do the rest of your journey into London by train. But in addition to the tens of pounds you're spending on the train fare, it's 25 quid to park your car. I mean, we've got to be honest about these things. These are just straightforward rip-off prices.
Yes,
and
they
there's
really
another
are.
one, Canterbury. I can tell you, I did something about this on a local radio station in that area only last week. The powers that be in Canterbury are saying to people who are driving their cars to the station in the morning. You know, a lot of people get up at 6:30 in the morning, park their cars at the station. It's pitch black, it's cold. They're getting on a train to go to work. They're doing their bit. They're an asset to society. And Canterbury Council is introducing the scheme in parts of the borough where you can't park your car before 10 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, for God's sake.
In other words, they're discouraging people from going out and doing a hard day's work for probably a reasonable day's pay.
The other great one, which has happened to a couple of friends of mine coming up from Sussex, is you get to the railway car park and the machine that you're supposed to buy a ticket from doesn't work. Because it's quite early in the morning, there isn't anyone manning the actual ticket office either. So you get your own ticket for the train. But when you come back from wherever you've been later on that day, you find that you've got a parking ticket because you didn't buy a ticket because you couldn't buy a ticket.
Yep, and that's more lucrative for them because the fine is more than the fee you would have paid. The other one that really annoys me, and surely there needs to be a legal challenge to this, and that's the council, and it's usually the council car parks that do this, where they say we give no change. So you want to spend 50p because you want to park for 10 minutes to go and do whatever you're doing, go to the bank or something. But you put in a £2 coin and it won't give you £1.50 change. I mean, if that's not legalised fraud, I used the in inverted commas, I don't know what is.
My other bugbear, of course, and people listening to this show will know that I've banged on about this many times, is that in my local car park in the town where I am, down in Sussex, they've started this vehicle registration thing where you have to put in the first 4 letters of your licence plate, right? Which means that if you park there for 10 minutes and you've booked it for an hour, you can't then hand the ticket to somebody else, which is what everybody used to do, to say, oh, by the way, if you just arrived, you can use this ticket because I'm not using it. And I always say, surely if you rent the space for an hour, you are entitled to then gift the rest of that hour to somebody else instead of them charging for yet another hour over the same space.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to that word greed, doesn't it, Mike?
Yeah.
They're not happy with the fact that you've paid already. They want more. It's more. And I've got to say that, you know, I don't know if it's been done on a national level, whether it's being done at these various conferences local councils have, or how it's come about. But obviously, some men and women at these councils, possibly aided and abetted by central government, we don't know. Certainly county council level, have obviously sat in a room somewhere and said to themselves, look, this is you know, a licence to print money. There are no laws, there are no regulations about how high we can go with this. And you know, the other thing, of course, is that a lot of people, you know, people will be listening to this, Mike, saying, well, if you don't like the charges, don't go there, go somewhere else. Listen, I spent an awful lot of time with my son at University College London Hospital at Tottenham Court Road, Euston, and we used to pay £50 a day, basically, to park for a 10-hour day.
Right.
And
And
you can
that's
say,
not
well,
that's
okay,
not and that's not a hospital car park. That's just regular parking, right?
That's absolutely right. And
Yeah.
what people, and for those of you who say, for those of the people who say, well, why can't you take the tube, or why do you need a car? When somebody is very, very ill and it's a cancer hospital, you need to be there with your car so that you can transfer to other hospitals and all sorts of other reasons. I mean, £50 a day plus the congestion charges now, and plus the other charges. We could be looking at a situation, if you sat down and did the sums, where it's £100, including your fuel cost, £100 or thereabouts to drive in from the outskirts of London into London and park your car in London.
Well, do you know, the day that those idiots from Extinction Rebellion got pulled off the trains in Canning Town, the Jubilee line was knackered, which is the way I go to work. I drove in because it was the only way I could get into work, basically, because all the buses were full. And it cost me for the 5 hours that I had to park the car, basically, effectively, to come in and do a radio show, about 40 quid for that, and about 12, 50, 13 quid for so it cost me nearly over £50 just to come to work for one show. Ridiculous.
Yeah, and where does that leave people who are in jobs?
Well, that's all they make.
To them.
Yeah.
Quite. And look at the price of for the fares. You've got to pay maybe 30, 40 quid to just come in from metropolitan area towns and villages and small cities in and around London. 30, 40 quid for a return ticket, and then on top of that, you've got to pay your parking fees at the station, or the alternative is to drive into London. I mean, and coming back to the protesters you talked about, I'm not going to give them the oxygen of publicity by naming them, but I mean, here we are being bludgeoned out of our cars, Mike, to get onto the trains and the tubes. I mean, I was sitting there on the train yesterday. I had to meet somebody, another car guy, and we had a meeting. Actually, it was the director of the soon-to-be relaunched British Motor Show, and there's both of us meeting at Waterloo. Right. Neither of us in a car, because we both agreed we've been bludgeoned out of our cars, and yet after being bludgeoned, priced, call it what you like, out of our cars and not daring to take them into London, what happens? You get protesters who are then objecting to us using underground trains and other modes of public transport. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Are we all supposed to stay at home? And when I said that to somebody recently, half jokingly, are we supposed to not come out of the door? And he said, well, you can stay at home, but as long as you don't have your wood-burning stove burning or your gas central heating on all day, because they're adding to the emissions problem as well. I mean, you can't win.
It's pathetic, isn't it? Absolutely pathetic. We didn't even get around to talking about a couple of other things we wanted to do, so we'll get to those another time. What can you tell us?
Well, basically, the reason they're increasing all the parking charges is that the infrastructure of all the car parks is absolutely knackered now. And we need major investment. And since enforcement came in 2007, they've been making millions. And nothing has been put down in these car parks. I inspected 100 of these car parks on a monthly basis, and nothing has been done in a period of 30 years in major construction. We have a car park in Macclesfield called Churchill Way, a multi-storey car park. Right. It's been condemned.
Really? I mean, you would think, Paul, would you not, that if they're going to make such a lot of money from these car parks, they'd build more of them?
Well, that's right. There's been no major investments. The drainage isn't working. The car park I was talking about, there's no drainage work. It floods the market downstairs. Right. But they carry on taking all our money off us.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. And what about what it means to the council budget itself? Do they kind of factor it in every single year as a very important part of their expenditure that they're going to be able to make?
Well, I can't comment on the last 5 years, but in my experience, there's been no major investment in the car parks. Only in enforcement to make the money.
Yes, and I suppose it's in their interest to have fewer car parks, possibly in certain places, so they can give out more tickets.
Well, that's right, and our area at the moment is going to be bringing in pavement parking.
Right.
Well, people who live in cottages where else can they park?
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, they're pricing the cars off the road for the lower-class people.
Yes, that's really what it's all about, I fear, Paul. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Gary says this: Islington Council now adds a £3 an hour environmental fee to parking charges if you have the audacity to own a diesel vehicle. They would be the diesel vehicles that not long ago all the experts were telling us to buy because they're more friendly to the environment. And Coleman says, Mike, my local council used to allow 30 minutes free parking. It was abolished earlier this year. One major retailer was down £7,000 in the first week. At least the local councillors who voted for this will be out at the next elections. Well, you never know, do you? What can you tell me?
Yeah, just listening to this morning talking about inner city parking and congestion charges.
Yes.
There's another cheeky little learner that seems to have grabbed hold quite well in Sheffield, where I live, and that's residential parking.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be happening in a lot of towns now. They've worked out, we can charge people for something that we never used to charge them for.
Well, yeah, so you pay the council tax on the street where you live, you pay the road tax for the car, and now we have to pay residential on the street where you live as well. I live in a semi-rural area, so we've got no hospitals nearby, no sports stadiums, no big arenas, anything like that. And we were flooded in 2007.
Right.
And the council thought it'd be a great idea if, to help with the rebuilding of the houses, that, we'll bring on street parking, £30 a time.
Yeah.
We thought, that'd be great if it helps us get back home. It's now nearly £150.
Yeah, that's the trouble, isn't it? Once you open that floodgate, suddenly you find yourself going, hang on, when did this happen?
It started in 2007.
Right.
And so the great thing about it is it's free to park on the street between 8:30 and 6:30, and then when the street's empty, you're literally paying for not being there because you're at work.
Right.
And then when you come home at night, people that don't live there can park on there and go about their business.
Right.
And you can't, yet you paid for the privilege of doing that.
One of the things they do in London, which is really cheeky, is they'll give you a section of the street which is for residential parking, right? But they'll also at some times allow other people to park there, but it's not very clear, so you can get confused. I once parked in what I thought was a parking bay for everybody else, and it turned out, because it wasn't properly marked, it was a residential bay, and I got a ticket, even though I'd paid to park there.
Yeah, and believe me, it's going to take off. It's took off in Sheffield big style. So,
and what about the numbers of people that have to get a car parking permit? Because, like I said, in Edinburgh they had this problem where there were more people buying the permits than there were spaces, so you couldn't always get a space.
Yeah, no, literally everybody on the street has to have a permit, literally, and you're not guaranteed to be able to park there as well when you get home.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It's like I've been working in Cheshire, Lincolnshire, so I come home late at night, gone 6:30, and I can't park on the street where I live, and I've paid for the privilege of parking there.
Southend Council, I live 30 foot away from our seafront seaway car park, right? Southend Council sold it for £1
right,
to a development company that want to put a hotel, a cinema, blah, blah, blah.
They sold it for £1?
They sold it for £1.
That's amazing.
They've bought a piece of land about half a mile away from the main seafront for £9 million to compensate for people not being able to park in the car park. They've stopped the coaches parking in there. The lorries, we used to have the lorries parking there. They had toilet block, shower block. They've stopped that. And apparently this company, am I allowed to say the name of the company?
Sure, say the name of the company, yeah.
Turnstone.
Okay.
Right, they've bought it. They purchased it for £1. It's common knowledge. Right, they purchased it for £1, and what they've done is I live 30 foot from it. Right, we've only got two roads that lead off onto the main seafront.
Right.
They've put parking permits down here. They've given us parking permits. We have coaches pull round here, lorries pull round here. I'll tell you, it's unbelievable.
That's ridiculous, isn't it?
This is Southend Council, on my life.
Yeah.
I swear to God, Southend Council. And we've been to meetings, we've tried to block it, we've tried to stop it. We did it last year. We went to council meetings, objected against it. All the seafront, all the like the arcades, the restaurants, everybody. The seafront is dead, and so is the high street now because they've taken away the car park.
So do people have to pay to park there now then?
Yeah, no, they're still, the car park's still open, and apparently they're giving Southend Council this tombstone, or whatever it's called, turnstone. I call them
Tombstone sounds about right, yeah.
Turnstone. They're paying Southend Council £285,000 a year. To get
the permission to charge the people to park there. That's a shocking story, Christine. Listen, we'll have a look into that one. That sounds dreadful. This is the thing, right? It's almost like they're selling off and renting back, if you like, the property that actually belongs to the people. They shouldn't be doing that, should they? Let's talk to Paddy, who's in Suffolk, wants to talk parking as well. Hi, Paddy.
Hiya, Mike.
How are you?
Very well, mate. You know these big out-of-town shopping centres you go to? You can go there. There's always parking. You can go into the big shop, and there'll be a cafe, whatever, and you're totally relaxed. You've got nothing to worry about. You haven't got to rush back to your car. Well, the local authorities are now demanding money for the parking spaces that the shopping centres provide on their land. The councils are demanding money off them.
Yes, we've just heard that story from Christine. They'll sell something to an operator, a parking operator, then they will get the parking operator to charge money for people to park there, then they will take a cut of that.
Yes, but the shopping centres still own the property. It's their property.
Right.
Not only that, the councils are now, if you go to work, you go in into your place of work through the gates, into a parking space there that the company owns, the councils now are demanding money for those parking spaces. So obviously...
Well, even if they're on private property?
Yes, absolutely.
Surely they can't do that, can they?
Yes, including, as I said earlier, those out-of-town shopping. Exactly the same. So if you're an employer and you've got dozens of parking spaces for your employees, many of them are thinking about passing that cost on to the employees.
Yeah. Well, that may well be possible to do, I suppose. I mean, it's a bit like when we have those conversations about the private clampers. You know, if you go and park on one of these bits of land, which it turns out is owned privately, and whether or not you actually have to pay them if they wish to give you a ticket. And it's not the same as city-owned or council-owned property. So I wonder if there's the get-out clause there somehow.
I don't know. All I know is nowadays parking on the street or anywhere isn't a criminal offence. It's a civil offence.
Yeah.
They deliberately changed the law, I think, back in the 90s, so that they would make all this cowboy clamping and parking possible.
Yes.
I live in a Sussex seaside town at the moment.
Uh-huh.
And I owe...
Well, you've moved from Suffolk, have you?
Yes.
Okay.
I owe the local authority over 10 grand in parking.
Really?
Not only in parking,
but that'll ruin you, and that'll ruin your credit rating, because it may be that it's not a criminal offence, but they can get all sorts of county court judgments against you, which will basically knacker your credit rating.
I don't live on credit.
Okay.
But the other thing is...
Just as well.
They can knock on your door all they want, and you can open the door to them. They can't rush in. They can't break in.
No.
Nothing. There's nothing they can do.
A little bit of good news about the parking.
Yeah, go on.
We live in Eastleigh. In Eastleigh, they give us an hour free parking on the high streets after 3 p.m.
That's not bad. I bet you that doesn't last.
Well, who knows? It's been going for years, so it seems to be quite popular.
Right. Oh, I'm sure it is.
Just for some information, they do it differently overseas. In Germany, where we've just come back from, if you park in your park and ride before catching your train, to Mike Rutherford's earlier thing about trains, they charge you €1 for the day.
Is that good? That is encouraging you to take the train, isn't it? I mean, that's a good idea. When I was in California, recently, right, I was trying to think of a way of getting in, because the roads there are so awful. It's like 8 lanes on both sides, completely rammed most of the time. So I thought maybe there's a train I could take in from sort of Long Beach into downtown Los Angeles. And there was a train station, but there was nowhere to park. So you'd have to drive to the train station and park sort of 3 miles away from it and then try and walk there and then get the train. So nobody does it.
Now, one more quick thing, just
Yeah.
like Rutherford's thing about them not giving change. In Dubai, if you say have an hour, buy an hour's parking, but there's only 20 minutes left
Right.
of that paid parking left before it becomes free, you get your other 40 minutes the next time it's paid, say the following morning or after the weekend. Isn't that brilliant?
That sounds now straightforward, common sense thinking, which we seem to not be capable of in this country.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. Thank you, Mike. Very well said and good information as well. Graham is in Peterborough, wants to talk about food on trains. Hello, Graham.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon. How you doing?
Oh, super duper.
Good. What have you got for us?
Right, Durian fruit. What's all the fuss about a boiled egg on a train?
Well, I mean, they can smell a bit rank, boiled eggs, you know?
Yeah, I was told and I've looked at durian fruit is,
That is really horrible. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and I've seen the way that cats and dogs react to it.
It smells like something that's just died, basically.
Yeah, I've yet to smell this thing. I worked with a Filipina, and she said it is rank.
It is awful, yeah, it's horrible. But, I mean, there's lots of things that you would not wish to smell, I would have thought, first thing in the morning, you know? Some people don't. I mean, anything, I would say anything that sort of smells quite strong, you should not eat on public transport, should you?
Well, the thing is that durian fruit is probably a bit like Marmite. It's, the devil's earwax.
Yes.
It smells horrible, but it tastes delicious.
It doesn't taste bad, but that's not the point. You wouldn't sort of want to eat a kebab on a train, would you?
Oh, crikey, that's immoral.
It is immoral. My producer's nodding his head because he probably does it every day. I can confess to doing it once, but I was very drunk at the time. That's my excuse. It was the last train back to Hastings and I was starving and I didn't have any time to eat it before I got on. But listen, thanks for your call.